Okay, backing up then to item 11.2, which is the public hearing for the authorization to purchase property in the Minnehaha Creek subwatershed and issuance of bonds to finance this purchase.
Yeah.
So the essentially what our process will be here is to open the public hearing, which I will do, and then we're going to have an introduction about this project, and then we'll have some discussion about the property and financing. We'll have an opportunity for public comment as well, and then we will close the public hearing and have discussion with the board on how we want to proceed on this. So I will turn it over to Mr. Whisker.
I think Chair Culkins, managers, good job of introducing this issue tonight. We're here to have a public hearing for potential acquisition at 325 Blake Road in the city of Hopkins. And Chair Culkins already talked about the opening of the public hearing and the process. But before I go much further, the specific actions that we're asking for from the board tonight are outlined in two resolutions that are included in your board packet, Resolution 11-085 and Resolution 11-086. And there's been a slight change to both of those, but essentially Resolution 11-085 would, if approved tonight, authorize the district administrator to finalize and sign a purchase agreement to acquire the fee title of the 16.9 acres of 325 Blake Road for $14,950,000. It would also authorize the district administrator to sign any necessary documents needed for closing and authorize him to make payment of $150,000 in earnest money to the seller. And a slight change to this resolution also authorizes the district administrator working with a retention of consultants to administer all actions required to secure additional leases within a 90-day time frame, and that's with the provision that staff comes back to the board within that time frame with a plan for future operations and management of this cold storage facility. The second resolution, 11-086, essentially is a resolution prepared by Steve Rushell from Fagery Benson, the Watershed District's bond counsel, and authorizes the issuance of bonds to finance this purchase. And we'll come back to the financing piece later in the presentation, and if there's any questions, Steve's here to answer those for you. And so before I kind of skip in to a brief outline of what we're going to cover tonight, I just want to introduce the members of our team that have been working on this particular project that are here to answer any questions that you might have. We've got Tom LaSalle from the LaSalle Group, and he's been our lead negotiator, and been working with also Laura Graff, who's a real estate attorney, on the purchase agreement details. And Laura's with Barnes and Thornburg. We have Bob Strakota from the Shanahan Group, and he has been working and will speak a little bit to how we valued the property and put together an appraisal. Joe Audi is back there somewhere from Wank Associates, and he has performed the environmental review and just recently completed the Phase 1 documents. Tom and I will probably split the baby perhaps on talking about the environmental review, and the final Phase 1, which has kind of just been packaged this evening, will be delivered out to the board tomorrow, but we'll cover the essentials on that. We've also got Barry Fick from Springstead, the Watershed District's financial advisor, and he's going to talk about the proposal process that the district went through to secure financing for this potential acquisition, and talk about how that impacts the Watershed District's overall annual debt and how that impacts their levy in the future. So we also have a couple people from the City Council, and I'll let those, we've got the mayor and a couple council members and staff, and I'll let those folks introduce themselves later after we go through the presentation and come back to the public hearing portion. So I'm going to briefly walk through, for the audience and for the board, a review of the urban corridor, which is basically 169 to Meadowbrook Lake, and what our goals are for this area, how they fit within our comprehensive plan, and just provide some basic context and background for this potential purchase. Then I'm going to turn things over to Tom, and he is going to talk about the major concepts of the deal and the due diligence that we've performed. So he'll highlight major elements of the purchase agreement, brief touch on the environmental review that we've done for this property, the title and survey work, and then that'll transition nicely into Bob talking about the value that we placed on this property, and then into Barry talking about how we've structured the financing. Then we'll kind of circle back to Tom. We'll talk about what I led into the presentation with, the ongoing cold storage operations and what we intend for basically the next 90 days, and how we're going to develop a plan and come back to the board. And then I'll round things out with Tom and talk about what the next steps are in the next couple weeks, and what the schedule is for that. After each section, we'll invite the board to ask questions, and then we'll do question and answer at the end, and then we'll turn it over to the public for questions on the whole deal, I guess. So this is a brief recap for the board, but basically for those that aren't familiar, the watershed districts placed a lot of emphasis on improving a pretty degraded section of Minnehaha Creek between Highway 169, which is just on the northwest corner of this slide, and Meadowbrook Lake, which is on the southeast corner of this slide. And what I'm going to do is, this might be old hat for some of the board members, but we're going to cover it again. We're going to look through a series of historic aerials that show how land use has shaped this particular section of the creek, and then that'll segue nicely into why this potential acquisition and some of the other initiatives that we pursued in this corridor meet the goals that are outlined in our comprehensive plan. So let's get right into things. This is a 1930s aerial, and you can see it's the same scale, the same layout. If I just jump back one slide, this is the Target Superstore and the Knollwood Mall. And if you look on this slide, obviously none of those buildings are there. This is a 1930s aerial that shows basically a lot of the homesteading that had occurred at this time, but not much really in terms of significant urban land use or development in the area. And the thing that we've like to point out on this slide is just the area within this section of the urban corridor that was available for water retention, storage, which provided floodplain protection, recharged local groundwater, provided base flow or sustained base flow for the creek. And so those wetlands served a lot of functions and values, and as we progress through, you'll see how incremental changes to land use have impacted this section of the stream system. In addition to the wetlands, obviously the key things to note are just the old alignments of the creek. We've got an old alignment here through St. Louis Park that no longer exists. This orange alignment is the new kind of ditched and straightened alignment, and we'll see when that came into being on some of these subsequent slides. So 1940s, just a few more single-family homes kind of creeping into this area, but obviously as you step into 1950s with the post-war boom, you had a lot of urban expansion through this area, and this is actually one of the first slides where you can see the presence of the cold storage facility kind of in its current configuration. Also seeing a lot of industrial and commercial land use migrate down along the rail line and start to fill in this general area of the creek. Also the Interlochen neighborhood kind of sprang to life during this time. 1960s, 70s, 80s are just kind of patterns of the same type of infill development and subsequent redevelopment, but you can see the area of the mall being redeveloped, the future area of Target being redeveloped, and this area of the stream at that time being ditched and straightened. More infill development in and around cold storage, and a lot more commercial development around the corridor. You can see this is one of the first slides where you see this part of the corridor actually impacting the old alignment and moving the stream north into its current ditch configuration. And so as you move forward into the 1970s, the 80s, the 90s, and bringing us right up to today, you can see that a lot of those wetland storage areas and old alignments of the creek just kind of vanish. And what we're end up with is just a really pinched area of real estate, a narrow corridor around the creek. And so when we think about what our goals are for this area, I think it's important to note that we're not trying to necessarily recreate a historic landscape that once existed, but we're trying to mimic the water patterns and the flow that used to persist back then that made the creek a healthy, vibrant system. And so when we developed the comprehensive plan in 2007, the board went through strategically and outlined a series of goals for the Minnehaha Creek Watershed that include things like floodplain management to reduce the severity of flooding by preserving and increasing water storage in this area, providing for water quality, abstraction of runoff through filtration and infiltration, which not only cleans up the water before it hits the stream, but also controls the quantity that ends up in the stream and consequently down into the Mississippi River. And one of the big elements of the comprehensive plan for this area is just basic ecological integrity. And one of the key focal points of the plan was to strategically use the land conservation program to support and enhance ecological function and value through this area. And what we mean by that is the basic floral and faunal plants, animals, water quality characters that you would expect to see in this system that we don't see today. And one of the best ways to do that is to expand the riparian corridor, or simply put, more green space around the creek. And that provides us opportunity to not only manage stormwater, but create a healthy, connected corridor that meets all of our ecological goals, our water quality goals, but also provides a great revitalized amenity for the neighborhoods that occupy this area. So it's as much about the people that live in this area, their ability to move up and down the creek corridor, enjoy open community green space, as it is about the water resource improvements, which are obvious. So with that being said, here's a picture of an initiative that we pursued earlier this year and late last year in partnership with the City of Hopkins after being approached to work in the Cottageville Park area, which is right up here, and obviously just to the north of cold storage. There are a series of acquisitions in and around this area that led to improvements in and around the creek corridor that opened up the creek visually, provide a lot of opportunities to reroute regional stormwater through this site, provide an opportunity for trails, community gardens, reduced crime. So the interlocking or overlapping benefits that the local government, the City of Hopkins, identified in their comp plan, in this instance worked really nicely with our goals of water quality and ecological integrity. And that's one of the reasons why we are talking here tonight about cold storage. So I kind of consider this one bookend of this particular cold storage property, because downstream of 325 Blake Road, you have the rest of the Urban Creek corridor, and strategic acquisition by the Watershed District back in 2008 secured these pieces of property with strong support from the City of St. Louis Park from the Weiss builders. This area was slated for townhome development, and by acquiring these, we've essentially laid the groundwork to facilitate the implementation of a big creek remeander project, which will move the creek back into its old alignment, create a lot more green space, improve stormwater, and generate trail connections from a project we already did on the Methodist Hospital site, all the way from Excelsior to the future light rail corridor, the existing Southwest Regional Trail. And so this brings us to what we're here to talk about tonight, which is 325 Blake Road. It's kind of an integral piece of the puzzle. When you look at this on the map, that kind of becomes obvious. And with that being said, that's, I think, enough background to cover why this particular property became of interest to the district, how it fits within our mission, and how it could potentially meet our goals within the urban corridor. And with throwing up this aerial, you can see that it provides about 1,000 creek of creek frontage. It's about 16.7 acres, and it's, like I said, just downstream of Cottageville and just upstream of another significant project that we're looking at pursuing. So that's my background. I'm going to turn things over to Tom to, as I said, summarize the basic terms of the deal that we've negotiated thus far, talk about the environmental due diligence, and to also talk about the title and survey work before we get into some more of the numbers and the financing.
All right, thank you, James. Mr. President and managers, first, a good place to start is a little history of the process we've been through on this site. We first approached the owners of this site about a year and a half ago, and we approached them with the concept of buying an easement and seeing if we couldn't solve the problems with an easement. In that meeting, the indication we got from them is that they felt that this was a site they could sell to a developer, perhaps for big box, perhaps expanding its current use, and they were talking of values in the range of $16.5 to $20 million, and were not interested in encumbering any part of it because they thought that would be a detriment to the future sale. We also, in studying it, James determined that it would be pretty difficult, if not impossible, to do anything with it under the current circumstance because in this picture, as you can see, there are trucks in the back, and the loading and unloading of frozen food happens along both sides of the building, and we can see how close that gets to the creek. At that time, we brought in Roland Aberg with Hart Howerton and started to look at what could happen along the entire corridor because this seemed out of reach. And through our partnership, shortly after that, we were entering into the memorandum of understanding with the city and learned from the city that, in fact, they were very opposed to this being big box realty. Their comp plan is for this to be a multi-use residential and retail, maybe some small office on this site. So there was a disconnect between where they were, which we read a little bit as negotiating. So we went through and did a plan for Hart Howerton for the entire length of the creek in there from about 169 or the other side of 169 down to the hospital. In the process of doing that, we asked them to look at what could we do on this site if we were to purchase it and do the remediation that we wanted to do for your purposes, and then selling the balance of the site to a developer, meeting the comp plan that the city had in place. In the process of doing that, we came up with some conceptual drawings with Hart Howerton, and we sent those out. We met with 3 developers to see if there was an interest in it, if they saw this as a viable site. And basically, we had these 3 were very interested in developing something that would be consistent with the city's comp plan. So we determined that there is a residual value to the portion of the site that we can't use and that can be developed in conjunction with the city's schools. At the beginning of the year, the owner contacted us and indicated that Deli Express, who is the major tenant right now, was interested in expanding their operations to this location, perhaps even adding on to the building some, I'm not sure what you call sandwich, making assembly. Anyway, they would do both processes on there and enter into a long-term lease or perhaps purchase the building. Through this, we started entering into more significant conversations and moved to the point we're at. We have a draft purchase agreement that's, or it's more than a draft, a purchase agreement that's been executed by the seller. Because Deli Express was the other party that was interested in purchasing this, and concerns by the current owners that they would lose tenants if the word came out that we were trying to purchase this with the intent of shutting it down at some point. They were very concerned about keeping this very quiet. Consequently, what we did is we built into the purchase agreement basically a concept where we did the due diligence up to this date. So as of today, we're actually as of tomorrow, we have the title completed. We have done all the survey work's been done. The environmental work has been done. And the only contingency that will be, the inspections have been done. So the only contingency remaining is financing contingency. You're going to hear tonight where you are on the financing, but we never really thought it wise to always leave that contingency in place. The The environmental work indicated, we did the phase 1, which has been completed. It indicated that there's some petroleum present in the site as well as PAHs, but nothing surprising for a brownfield site in a location like this, and nothing that would deter you from purchasing the site. There is a no association determination from the MPCA to the current owner, which is assignable. Joe Adi with Wing Environmental is starting the process to obtain a second letter that we would receive following closing. He does not anticipate a problem in obtaining that. And the demolition and disposal costs will be based on would be a little bit higher, but just based on a function of moderately contaminated soils. So environmentally, this is a building that is very manageable. The inspections, this is a complicated building, interestingly enough. How complicated can be a big freezer? Surprising. There is a brine system as well as a ammonia cooling system in the building. The ammonia is for the very deep 10 below temperatures. Ammonia is a dangerous substance and has to be operated properly. There are very good contracts in place and oversight of the management of that, both by the subcontractor who is responsible for it as well as the management company. There is a backup brine tank and backup pump that comes with it. That was a requirement in the Deli Express lease. So those are significant pieces of equipment cost-wise and are there for replacement to keep it running. The building has it produced in 2010 $300,000 that's available for debt service. This year they have been not leasing. They slowed on leasing to the short-term tenants. The main tenant, Deli Express, has a lease that expires in November of 2013, and they've been infilling the rest of the building with shorter-term leases. An example would be Super Value leases a portion of the building for turkey storage, frozen turkeys. They come in through the summer, and then they all go out in November for Thanksgiving. We believe we can continue to produce similar cash flow. We can accelerate the leasing on some of those spaces. Dealing with Deli Express, we're really getting ready to have Deli Express be in a position to take more of this building. We recommend that if you approve this tonight and we move forward, that we would talk to Deli Express about what's their goal term was. Because it may make sense to, they may want to leave earlier, which might make, we'll analyze and see if that makes sense for you. If they want to stay a little longer and we can make that make sense, it may work into the plan. So we'll take a look at that and come back in the future and discuss it. We were successful in entering into a purchase agreement at a price of $14,950,000. And I will now let Mr. Dakota tell you how we arrived at a range and a price and justified this purchase.
Mr. President and managers, I'm Bob Strakota. I'm an appraiser. I'm president of Shanahan Company, and I have been appraising in this area for over 35 years. I'd like to first recommend to you that you proceed with this transaction and purchase this property at $14,950,000. In doing so, you will be buying a profitable business and piece of real estate that a group of people own today and would sell to you. Now, I want to back up and give you a little history on this property so that you know what has happened in this property in recent years, the last decade. The current owners acquired this property in 2007 for $7 million. It was purchased in a foreclosure situation from a company that was in financial duress. The building was empty. Not all of the refrigeration equipment worked in the building. It had a leaky roof. and it had other systems problems in the building. These people bought the building intending to tear the building down and sell the land to a big box user. For a number of reasons, they were not successful doing that. So what they did is they rebuilt the business model. They put a new roof on the building. They fixed all the refrigeration and cooling equipment. They got the building running, and then they leased up the building. And today, there are 5 tenants in the building paying rent, and the building is making money. That was not the case in 2007, when it was acquired for $7 million. At that time, the assessor valued the property for $5.4 million. The assessor today still values the property at $5.4 million. It is not worth $5.4 million. There isn't any way we could buy it for that kind of money. Our appraisal is $15 million on this property, and it is a successful refrigeration and cold storage building. And if we did not acquire it, it would continue to function as a successful freezer and cold storage building. The building's replacement value is in excess of $35 million. So, if we would try to acquire this building through some other legal means, we would be responsible for at least $35 million of replacement. So, we're in the sense that we're able to buy this today and do it without any other legal action is a huge measure of success in what has been accomplished in negotiating for the purchase of this property. The land across the street sold this past year in December for December of 2010, and this is the Oasis store, for $18.70 a square foot. Smaller piece of dirt, but in the urban environment, larger pieces of property are often worth more than smaller pieces of property. i.e. downtown, a larger piece of land is worth more than a smaller piece of land. And as you go to Victoria, it changes. A larger piece of land is not worth as much per unit as a small piece of land. We are in an urban environment here. A larger piece is worth more than a smaller piece. But if we were to take $18.70 a square foot, what the land sold for across the street in December of 2010, the resulting value is $14 million. Just the land, no consideration for the building. So, I am recommending to you tonight that you proceed with the purchase of this property and allow staff to plan this property for the purposes that the watershed has. And if there is residual property, it has value in the marketplace and it will be saleable. And that's a decision you can make at some point in the future. But I guarantee you that the land will have value in the future. That concludes my report.
We'll turn to Barry now, and he'll kind of explain how, segueing from Bob's valuation of it and the negotiated deal, how we're actually going to finance this thing if we decide to move forward.
Thank you, James. Mr. President, managers. My name is Barry Fick. I'm the Senior Vice President with Springson Incorporated, and I have been working in the public finance area for a little bit over 2 decades now, and have substantial experience working with similar type programs and purchases as you are considering this evening. The typical methodology or method for financing properties such as this by the Watershed District would be to have a conduit bond issuer, in your case Hennepin County. When they issue debt, you would take and be responsible for a portion of the repayment of that debt. And in this particular case for this property, Hennepin County has declined to participate in that for very good reasons, which is there are a couple of those. First of all, with the Hennepin County typical situation, they would do these as tax exempt financings. Here, because we have a rental tenant that generates a substantial amount of rent, it would have to be done as a taxable financing, which Hennepin County does not wish to do for us, and they don't do in general. And secondly, as was noted earlier, the light rail runs adjacent to the property, and currently with an environmental impact statement process going, neither we nor Hennepin County wanted to be in a position where there could be any perception that Hennepin County would be somehow benefiting from or be affected by the property being sold as it wants the light rail process, the light rail corridor. So to avoid any perception of taintedness or anything like that, and because of the taxability issue, it was determined that the best alternative for the watershed district would be to pursue a private placement bonding with a finance institution. So what we have done is we have looked and pre-qualified a number of the financially strong financial institutions, and working with those folks, we developed, working with also the staff of the watershed district, a request for proposal, which we submitted to a number of banks in the community who are both familiar with the watershed district as well as familiar with the type of financing and the property which we were looking at potentially purchasing here. That resulted in a process which allowed you to get an element of competition into this situation, and we could hit one firm against the other to get the most favorable rate and the most favorable terms, which would preserve financial flexibility for you going forward. As a result of that RFP process, we sent that out to a number of firms and received the proposals back, evaluated the proposals, and have the report for you tonight to present. A couple of the firms which we sent proposals to chose not to respond. One of them chose not to respond because they said the amount of money requested financing of up to $16 million was too small for them to consider. They wanted something larger. Another bank sent back a declining to respond because they said it was too large for them to consider as a single transaction when there would be no further business with them. And the best proposal submitted back to us was submitted by Wells Fargo Bank. And the proposal which they submitted back to us allows us, we believe, to maximize flexibility for the district and allowing you to sell, develop a portion of that property in the future, include operations of the existing tenants and continue to operate those and receive the rent payments, which, as Mr. LaSalle noted, at approximately $300,000, will be able to fund a significant portion of the anticipated debt service that would be payable on this property for the short-term period here. And also, this will allow you to incorporate the goals that James talked about earlier for the watershed district overall. With that in mind, we looked at the Wells Fargo proposal as being the best of the options available. They offered us a choice of fixed or variable rate debt. Variable rate means the rate would change every week or every month or something like that, or we could lock the rate in for the full term of the financing. They offered us a choice of 3 or 5 years for the financing. Within either case, the first 3 years, we would only be responsible for making interest payments. And then we would have to make some principal payment in year 4, and another principal payment in year 5, and then we'd have to refinance the outstanding balance at that point. We could do that either through working with Wells Fargo, or we could go back if the property has been changed its use so that perhaps we could go through Hennepin County. And if you sold off a portion of the property to some other firm, you could use that to reduce the amount you would eventually have to borrow. So our goal in this, as I mentioned earlier, was to make sure that you, as a watershed district, have sufficient flexibility so that you can really incorporate future events and pretty much do what makes the most sense for you, both within your mission and with this particular property. So we looked at the idea of comparing to what the current interest rate environment is. Currently, investment interest rates and borrowing rates are very low and very favorable for issuers. Not so much if you're an investor in terms of saving or putting your own money into a checking or, a certificate of deposit, but if you're borrowing, especially at a public finance level, they are very favorable. That led us to recommend going with a fixed rate option so we can lock in the current low rates and not have to worry about interest rate risk changing and rates rising in the next 5 years. We also looked at where the rates are now, because they're extremely low. We recommended that we go with a 5-year option to again maximize our flexibility and take advantage of low rates for a longer time period. And finally, the Wells Fargo proposal did not require or mandate any financial constraints on us in terms of we have to meet certain requirements, certain levels of income. They are comfortable with the financial capability through the taxing authority that the watershed district has and the ability to manage the property. They are comfortable with just funding the acquisition without any constraints placed on us. We have also looked at what the rate formula is, because what will happen is we did also receive today a firm commitment from Wells Fargo to provide the funding for the property, and they have agreed that they will be able to complete the sale and have everything taken care of by the end of the month this September. So we have, with Steve Rochel's help, he has developed a resolution which is included in your board packet tonight, and I'll let Steve discuss that later if you have questions about that. But that includes a rate formula which basically says until we actually get to the closing, that rate will fluctuate up and down depending on where the market is. Today, for example, the interest rate market changed, as you probably looked at your 401k balances perhaps, and so they have declined a bit. At the same time, interest rates also declined. The 10-year Treasury hit a new all-time low rate today. So our rate that we have with the Wells Fargo proposal is based on their cost of funds plus 1.27%. Their cost of funds has gone down because interest rates have gone down. So we expect to see an even more favorable rate than we have been looking at and talking about with them today. And so we will be finalizing that at the actual closing. Part of what our job and responsibility for you is going to be is to make sure that that rate calculation is both accurate and favorable within terms of what the market is looking at. And from our preliminary assessments, we believe it will be that way, but we'll certainly double check that when we get to the actual pricing date to make sure that that is accurate and the most favorable rate we can get. As I noted also, we're looking at a 5-year debt projection. Right now you have one outstanding bond with Hennepin County. 2010B is the name of that bond. It has an annual cost or an annual debt service payment requirement of about $217,000. For this particular property that we're looking at, on an interest-only basis, the approximate interest cost is going to be about $554,000. And as we noted earlier, the first 3 years, we only are required to pay the interest. Keeping in mind that we have a $300,000 approximate net receipts available from the rental property in the current state, that significantly reduces the amount of net payment that would be required to be made up from the existing tax levy that the watershed district has in place. Also, we'll be looking at potentially in October, another sale on a tax-exempt basis from Hennepin County for some other properties that we have previously purchased, and that would have about a $365,000 annual payment. So the combination of the existing Hennepin County financing plus the estimated Wells Fargo cost for financing of Lake Road property and the estimate for the 2011 Hennepin County financing would result in about $1.13 million of borrowing costs, which would be offset by around $300,000 from the net revenues available from the Lake Road property. So putting us down to well under $1 million of annual debt service payments, which is still well below the amount of levy that is currently being received by the watershed district. So from that perspective, we are confident that this financing does not place any undue burden on the watershed district and would be financeable and be able to be carried without any undue burden for you.
Thank you, Barry. I think the last thing to do before we wrap up and turn this over to the board for questions is to have Tom just briefly run through in a couple minutes or less kind of the basic structure of the leases and tenants, which you already kind of touched on, and just our plan moving forward throughout the next 90 days, because part of the resolution that the board's going to be asked to act on tonight, again, authorizes the district administrator to take care of, in conjunction with our consultants, any leases that crop up in that time frame while we develop a continuing operation plan for the business.
So what we're suggesting is that, as I said earlier, this is a complicated building. There's one main tenant. There are seasonal leases that have actually already come up. We have one that's upright, is prepared to be executed now. And we should continue to do those. What we're proposing is over the next 90 days, we would continue to use C.B. Richards as the manager. We have a contract with you to manage, but we think that it's to your advantage to use them as the day-to-day manager. We would oversee them on your behalf. The idea would be to come back to the board in 90 days with a longer-term plan of how to manage it. We'll have a better idea at that time where Deli Express is going, and we can together see what's the most financially viable way to proceed with this with the building. So we'll be doing that, and we'll be dealing. We do need to deal with the leases as they come up. What we would do is use the lease with Deli as the guideline. We will not enter anything that exceeded that. But basically, we will come close to it. These other tenants generally are coming in with 6 month, 1 year type leases.
Thank you. And Tom already kind of touched on these, and we introed with what the next steps are going to be with regards to the resolution that you're acting on tonight. But the obvious next steps are, if the board approves the resolution, once it considers it tonight, we move forward and execute the purchase agreement, which I understand has already been signed by the seller. The financing would be finalized. We already have, as Barry pointed out, a commitment from Wells Fargo Bank. And once the purchase agreement is executed, we'd be looking to close with the seller and take care of any and all documentation associated with that within the next 10 days. And then in that 90-day time frame after we close, we'd be working with Tom and some other consultants to develop an operations plan and bring that back to the board for review and approval. So with that, I think we kind of touched all the main points for you tonight. And we're here to answer any questions that you might have and turn it over to the formal public hearing.
Okay, so before we open it up for public comments, are there any questions at this point from board members? Seeing none, we'll move on and ask if there's anybody in the audience that has any questions or comments.
Do you want?
I already did.
You probably got more pressure you than Good evening, Mr. President and managers and city staff. Just thank you very much for this opportunity to address you this evening. And
Could you just give us your
I'm
name
Eugene
and
Maxwell,
address?
Mayor, so you have
Thank you.
with me is Christy Halverson, the city, Hopkins City Council, and Christy Nelson,
Thanks.
Economic Development. So with that, I think you have a letter of support from the city that the city council passed a couple weeks ago. But basically, it's basically just to say thank you very much for the efforts that you've done over the last couple of years. It's been a great partnership that's been working with the city of Hopkins along with the Watershed District to develop some items that we want to get developed. Not only just to look at those, but look at a bigger picture to say what we should do for this whole corridor, this whole area. And that really helps us a lot to develop the site and to go on with it. You look at the last two sites, the last 16 and a half acres is a lot of land. The last couple of sites we had in the city of Hopkins you can look at, there's only been a couple, because basically we're in the redevelopment is the super value, the expansion of super value, and also the new expansion of the Cargill office building. So we're pretty good at redeveloping a piece of property and what I think everybody wants to see and how we can help the community. And any kind of development we're going to do now in this area is going to be a plus because of the clean water. And clean water is a great enhancement for anything that you want to do. any kind of development you want to do. If we want to do mixed senior housing and some of the other stuff. Clean water aspect, the clean water should help everybody in the whole community. It's just a plus for all of us. So thank you very much, and hopefully you pass this resolution tonight. When we get through it, it'll be a privilege to work with you to redevelop the site and to work forward to the next, hopefully the next couple of years, and start the process right away. We have some work to do on the park that we're going to work together with the Watershed District and the community to really develop a nice looking park for that area. And we just carry on over to this area. That's going to be another enhancement for the city office. All citizens in office can really enjoy. So thank you again.
I don't, I guess I'd just voice Jean's comments that we really appreciate all the cooperation and coming together where our two visions really have overlapped, and we've seen areas where we can partner and achieve some pretty amazing things, and I think this site is one of those where the opportunities are big, and I think that we're going to all end up with an eventual development that we can be proud of.
Really, when James gave us the presentation that he gave a little earlier to City Council, it really opens up everybody's eyes. It's just amazing what's something that really didn't take care of, and what you can turn back into something that really once you start caring about it and doing that. So James, thanks very much for your presentation too. And it just opens up a lot of eyes and a lot of different mindset for everybody else. How well we can develop this piece of property along with the Watershed District in Fulton.
And I think just working together and just having those buildings torn down there by the creek, I've had more people tell me we didn't know there was a creek there. So I think it's just perfect that, now we're showing them that we have an amenity that they, will be able to enjoy. Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you, guys. Mr. Wisner? I just wanted to note for Chair Culkin before we do kind of close things out, a couple notes. Just wanted to thank the mayor and the city council and the city staff for kind of providing their vision and assistance throughout the process, and just kind of a procedural note for the board and for the record that the public notice requirements obviously for this purchase have been met. We've distributed the public notice to all the local communities and the counties, and this has been published in the Star Tribune. And other than the comments that we're going to receive here tonight, we haven't received any formal or official written comments. We've received a couple informal inquiries from various county commissioners' office, but nothing in writing. So, thank you.
And I think I can speak for the board and say to the mayor and council members, we really appreciate the partnership and your being here this evening and your support. So thank you. Anybody else have any comments on this item? Seeing none, I guess we'll close the public hearing and open it up for board discussion. And Manager Keeley has her hand up.
I wanted to know if when I move this, if it should be separate, each resolution.
It's Manager Keeley, managers. That's the board's preference, but I think on advice from legal counsel that it'll keep things cleaner if we move the resolution separately.
I'll move resolution 11,085.
Second.
We have a motion to approve staff's recommendation 11-085. It has been seconded. Any discussion? Anybody in the audience have a comment on this motion? Mr. Wisker?
Just to be clear that you are moving the revised version that was handed out that provides the administrative authority that we discussed earlier.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Should we do roll call?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
No, not on that.
On a
We don't need to.
Okay.
Okay, and then that leaves resolution 11-086.
So moved. I'd move, if you want to remember. Move passage of resolution 11-086.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Anybody in the audience like to comment on this motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Manager Miller.
I'd just like to compliment the staff on the incredibly high-quality work that was this presentation is kind of a summation of weeks and months and, well, obviously, years now of work, and it's, I don't think anybody could equal the quality or exceed the quality that this product displays. And we want to thank all the consultants. I know there's quite a number of them, but they all performed their task incredibly well. When you think of the board authorized this like a month ago, I think, to analyze this and come back with a recommendation, and they came back with a purchase agreement and a financing, is really a sign of some pretty high quality work, and I really want to congratulate the staff and the consultants.
Just like to point out that obviously, I mean, I facilitated a little bit of the presentation tonight, but Mark's done a lot of the kind of heavy lifting behind the scenes, and this has really been a team effort with a lot of help from a lot of really smart people, smarter than myself for sure.
Okay, yes, and just speaking for myself, I think everybody would agree, this is a huge purchase for the district in a number of different ways, and kind of a scary one too, but because of all the great work that everybody has done, it's, I think, turned out really, really well. So, thank you all as well.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
They are complete.
Okay, moving on then to item 11.4.